Alright, this is my presentation on the global persecution of Christianity. Before we get started, just a little bit about me. My name is Brandon Booth. I am a senior here at Bloomsburg University, and I am a political science major. So, a little bit of an overview of the persecution of Christianity. And this is something that I think a lot of people, especially here in the United States, do not think about, because obviously here in the United States, Christianity is the dominant religion, but across the world, that is actually just not the case. According to the United Nations, Christians face the highest level of persecution in the entire world of any religious group. So while obviously we see a lot of persecution here in the West of other religious minorities, in many parts of the world, and we're going to specifically talk about kind of where those parts of the world are, Christians are actually the minority group that are being persecuted and oppressed at higher rates than any other religious group. Um, it's estimated that about 388 million Christians in the world face what are considered high levels of persecution. This is 1 in 7 Christians in the entire world. So, I mean, 1/7 of all Christians in the world face what are considered high levels of persecution. And this comes in various different forms, right? It comes on things like physical attacks on churches and homes, but then there's other forms of persecution. It could be, you know, voting persecution, unfair treatment with the law, stuff like that. Including in some cases, you can be put to death for being a Christian. But that's something I'm going to talk about actually here on this next slide. So the regions of the world where we see the highest levels of persecution, obviously there's levels of persecution of Christians to varying degrees everywhere, but where we see the highest actually are in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. In these three places, we see really, really extreme levels of persecution, kind of this high levels of persecution that we talked about earlier. So I'm going to go through 3 examples from these regions and kind of just hopefully highlight a little bit of what this could look like. So in Nigeria, what we're seeing is just the, killing of Christians. Put very simply, people are just killed. Researchers and estimates say that about 3,490 were killed in 2026 alone. So literally just in this current year, which it's worth noting we are not done with, 3,490 Christians have already been killed in just Nigeria for their faith. But we also see this in North Korea, where the Christian faith is seen as this, it's seen as a threat to the power structures of the authoritarian regime there. So what we see is the imprisonment and torture of practicing Christians. And then we also see this in India, where it's less institutionalized, but there's currently a large movement of Hindu nationalists. And this has always been around, but it's really been, reignited recently. And we are seeing that, there is political and religious violence against Christians, which could include things like beating and, in some extreme cases, killing Christians. So that brings us to the future outlook, right? What does the future of this look like? And what we see is it's probably going to get worse before it gets better for Christians, but there is some hope, and I'll explain kind of why. So the reason why I say it's probably going to get worse before it gets better is what we're seeing is with increased means of surveillance, it's becoming easier and easier to figure out who Christians are. Things like, cameras and identity tracking and stuff like that is making it to where people can kind of track where these people are, who are going into these churches, and it's leading to, while in a lot of these countries where Christianity is persecuted, people go to these like kind of hidden home churches, and home churches meaning churches that are in someone's home, right? They're underground, they're not really supposed to be seen, but they're being able to, find this now. And what we're seeing is this is going to lead to continued persecution, right? A lot of these people who are anti-Christians, whether it be because they believe in a competing faith or they just see it as a threat to their power dynamics, aren't just magically beginning to follow Christ. They are, continuing to persecute. However, it's worth noting that there is actually a positive outlook for Christians, in that in all of the areas that I mentioned where Christians are currently being persecuted and oppressed, Christianity is actually growing in these areas at higher rates than anywhere else in the world. Due to the work of, missionaries and stuff like that, we are seeing that in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, these are the 3 regions where Christianity is growing the most. Now, it's worth noting that obviously it's easier to grow more when you start with a lower thing of Christians. So we're in a lot of the West where people are already Christian. you're not going to see the same level of growth. That is to be assumed. But this growth is still very, very large, and for Christians, very reassuring of their faith and of the validity of their faith. So we are seeing Christianity growing in these areas, which over time, if these rates, continue to grow, would mean that Christianity might actually become a majority religion, which would, make it a lot harder to oppress it. But anyway, that is my presentation. These are all the sources that I used for information and images, and have a good one.